Today, we are going to be starting a new series. Um, I'm not sure what I'm going to call this series just yet, but for now, I'm just going to say we're going to be dismantling and rethinking some common fantasy tropes, and basically trying to give them a twist, maybe make them a bit more interesting, see if we can get creative with things. And today, I've decided to start with dragons. Now, the reason why I chose dragons is because a couple of years ago, I was part of this group where we would create fantasy content. And we were divided into groups depending on like the role we would do. So there was a group that did like art, there was a group that designed like games, and in my case, I'm not good at art, and I'm not that great at designing games. So I was in the group that was in charge of writing. So essentially, we could write, for example, short stories, we could write poetry, um, just talking about specific topics. And I remember the first topic that we ever kind of like talked about was dragons. And I remember I wrote a short story that I really enjoyed writing, kind of rethinking the reason why dragons hoard treasure, because you know that tends to be a common fantasy trope associated with dragons. So that's what we're going to be answering today. So it's the golden question: why do dragons hoard treasure? Now, to start off, what I'm going to do actually is talk a bit about dragons in general, more about I guess the different kinds of dragons that exist. I'm not that well versed when it comes to dragon lore, apart from maybe the more common ones. But I have assembled the total of 12 dragons, 12 different types of dragons, and I provided images for each. And we're going to try and compare a little bit about how they are different, you know, at least physiologically speaking. So this first slide here has the first four dragons. We have probably one of the more common ones that people, think of when they think of the word dragon, which is the winged dragon, and it's more of like the Western representation. So you can see, I guess you can see my mouse probably, but you can see it over here. It's the dragon, horns, how we normally see it. Four legs, that's an important feature for the winged dragons in the Western. Long tail, and wings, right? So these characteristics make up the Western dragon, probably the one you would expect like in Dungeons and Dragons, for example. You expect to see it in a lot of common media as well. So horns, wings, and four legs. Okay. Then we have a variant to the dragon, which is the drake, which is very, very similar as you can see here. The only feature that's kind of missing are the wings. So you still have horns, you have, your normal dragon shaped like body, head, they have the four limbs, but they don't have wings. So in this case, that would be called a drake. You have a drake. Wyverns. Wyverns here, those are the other very common ones. I think wyverns are the ones that you will see, for example, in media such as Game of Thrones. I've never watched Game of Thrones, but based on what I've heard, they use wyverns. So wyverns, very similar to dragons, often confused actually, because you can see they still have that dragon face shape, they still have those horns, the body is awfully similar, and they have wings. Now, the difference is the appendages. Wyverns have only the two rear legs, as you can see here. They don't have the front legs. I'd say the front legs are kind of like mixed into the wings, and the wings tend to be more, I guess, like bat-like. I don't know. I think the wyverns tend to have like larger wings than what Western dragons represent. So you can see they're kind of combined into a single thing. So technically, you would say wyverns have two legs and two wings, while the more traditional Western dragon has four legs and two wings. So that's one of the more important differences you'll notice there. Worms, on the other hand, pretty straightforward. The pronunciation, if I'm not saying it wrong, is the same as, a worm, like the animal. So it literally just looks like a worm, right? No legs, no wings, still has horns, still has the dragon shape. That's about it. I guess you can kind of say it looks like a snake, but I like saying it looks like a worm because it's a worm, right? So it just makes sense. On to the next one. These are a bit more exotic, maybe a bit more niche. You have a cockatrice. As you can see, it kind of looks like a rooster. I'm not sure what media uses cockatrice. I know a lot of like MMOs maybe have cockatrice as enemies. I feel like Final Fantasy has cockatrices too, if I'm remembering that correctly at some point. But basically, it's kind of like a rooster combined with a dragon. You see, it has the dragon-like body, but the upper torso and the head, it's a rooster. It has the wings, fairly similar to a wyvern, right? And it has hind legs. Now, the hind legs are not dragon legs, as you can see. They are, well, rooster legs. So it's sort of a combination. I think it's a very interesting one. It's very nice. Very unique, I'd say. The amphitheater, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Amphitheaters are kind of like worms. You'll see them, very similar. The difference being is that they have wings. So while the worms had no legs, no wings, just the general body, amphitheaters, they have wings, and their wings are kind of like the wyvern wings, or I guess kind of like the dragon wings too. So you'll see them there. And this coloring here kind of reminds me of Charizard, so that's fun. Then you have Quetzalcoatl. I never learned how to pronounce this. I'm terrible at pronouncing this, but I do know this belongs more to like the Mesopotamian cultures or the yeah, I guess like Latin American cultures. They actually have a god that is represented by this, and I think it's in Smite. I think it's a playable character in Smite too, inspired by the god Quetzalcoatl. If you've ever played the Fate series, there's also one of the servants is Quetzalcoatl, so it's very popular in a lot of media. The way it's represented in a lot of different ways. I guess this is more like the traditional one, but essentially it's a worm again, except it has feathers. It can have feathers in different parts of the body. Um, I've I've seen it have feathers that look like wings too, but I don't think it should. I think its feathers are more just for decoration. So you can see in this traditional one, it has the feathers attached to the tail, and it also has feathers on the top of its head, or kind of like the back of its neck. Makes it look like a mane of sorts. So distinguishing feature for Quetzalcoatl is the feathers. And then you have the sea serpent, right? I think for example, Jormungandr from Norse mythology maybe qualifies as a sea serpent. Essentially, sea serpents are also dragons. Again, very similar to worms, because no wings, no legs, also similar to Quetzalcoatl. The difference being, for its distinguishing features, it has fin-like appendages, right? You can see it has a fin on its tail, kind of have fins over the back of its body, has fins, of course, around its neck area, on top of its head. Its horns tend to be a little bit different as well, kind of similar to Quetzalcoatl. And of course, being sea serpents, their habitats tend to be aquatic. So the fins are, made and built for that. And here we have the last four. Now, some of these I don't think I've heard of before, or at least not in terms of dragons, so it was interesting. You have the lindworm. Lindworm, again, kind of like the worm, kind of like the amphitheater, but you know how the amphitheater had wings while the worm had nothing? Well, the lindworm doesn't have wings, but it does have its front legs. So it has those two little front legs there. Kind of weird. I don't know if I've seen this one in media, to be honest with you. But I do think it's an interesting concept. It also has a strange head shape. It has like this little I guess you can call it like a horn, and these kind of look like fins. I don't know if lindworms are supposed to be aquatic. I don't think so. I think they would have more fins if they were aquatic. But they do look very interesting. Maybe they're more towards the oriental kind of dragons, right? If someone knows more information about them, I'd love to hear more about them. But they seem interesting. Then you have the salamander. Now, salamanders often are, thought of as the actual reptile that exists today, but you can also have dragon-like salamanders. And you can see this one has fire on its tail. That's obviously because, well, we associate salamanders with flame. We associate salamanders with fire. So it's only natural to have it there. And again, very similar in structure to a worm, or I guess like a lindworm, but this one actually has four appendages, like 2 front legs, 2 back legs, and of course the fire as the distinguishing feature. Then you have the Chinese dragon, which I guess is more of like a generic category because you can allocate most of the oriental dragons here. Normally, these dragons tend to have very long, slender bodies. You can see there's like these 2 distinguished categories of dragons. The ones with very snake-like bodies, so things like the lindworm, salamander, the Chinese dragon, amphitheater, quetzalcoatl, sea serpent. And then you have the ones that are more drake in nature, like the dragon, the drake, the wyvern, and the hydra, which we're going to get to. So I feel like those are 2 very distinguished categories. Now, oriental dragons, or in this case the Chinese dragon, they tend to be associated a lot with like deities, from what I'm aware. They tend to be very, very wise in their stories. And they tend to look like this, very elongated. You've probably seen like Chinese dragons for like Chinese New Year and such. They tend to have these whiskers, which I always thought were very, very funny. Manes, I don't know if the manes are actually made from hair. They visually look like they're made from hair. They also have them attached to the tail and different parts of the body as well. And similar in structure to what the salamander has, they look like a worm with 4 appendages, essentially. And then you have the hydra, which the hydra is very popular in Greek mythology, and I guess in other mythologies maybe as well. But people are normally more familiar with the Greek one. Hydras very much are like the traditional dragons. You can see 4 legs, 2 wings, the very drake-like body structure. Their defining feature, however, is having multiple heads. And in a lot of their myths and a lot of their stories, the defining feature is that if you cut off a head, then 2 more grow back kind of in its place. So if I'm not mistaken, one of the more famous tales is Hercules or Heracles, depending on the version of the myth that you know, having to take down a hydra. So I guess that was just to kind of put into perspective, get people aware that different kinds of dragons exist. I'm not awfully knowledgeable about all of them, so if you guys know more details about dragons or about these different kind of dragons, you can leave them in the comments. What I'm going to talk about now, though, is the main thing that we're coming for, which is, why do you think dragons hoard treasure? Now, the thing with dragons hoarding treasure is they haven't done it forever. I feel like it's been more introduced in certain groups of media. I know in Greek myths, or in mythology in general, I feel like dragons were associated with guarding treasure or guarding specific things for the gods. So that is the first theory that we're going for. I feel like a lot of theories can kind of lead off of that, which is, dragons hoard treasure because they were commanded by gods or because they have an ancient pact that goes with it. So imagine these more divine-looking dragons that were set as protectors for valuable pieces of treasure, maybe protecting vaults, right? So I have here dragons as divine servants, right? Like they serve the gods, they serve the divinity. Maybe it's religious too. Maybe they can protect shrines, as I've mentioned here. maybe they can protect areas, warding against like curses. Maybe they protect cursed objects, cursed treasure, cursed items. I think it's a very flexible thing. Like you can play around with it a lot. Makes it very interesting. You can maybe even play around with it in the sense of originally this was their purpose, but as the generations shifted, right, the dragons kind of lost contact with the gods, but they still kind of honor this practice because they follow their elders, right? So it's more of they do it now, but they don't really know why they do it. If you're writing a story, this could be very interesting. I think dragons are very interesting concepts to work around for writing stories. Or if you play D&D or any other tabletop games and you have dragons as NPCs or enemies or just part of the story in general, having some of these fun alternatives can make the campaign more interesting, right? Adds more depth to it. So I like this one. Kind of simple and maybe very much realistic, but that kind of gives it its charm. Now the next one. Dragons tend to hoard treasure as a way of attracting, powerful opponents, powerful foes. So now think of these like very tough looking dragons that value the act of fighting their opponents, right? So their sole objective in the world is trying to look for worthy opponents. And over time, over generations, they've maybe come to realize that if they hoard treasure, powerful people will come looking for that treasure. So this gives them the opportunity of finding people who potentially are worthy foes, they're worthy opponents, and it grants them the fight that they seek. Now, if they perish during the process, that's just part of the situation for them, right? That just makes the whole ordeal even more worthy. It means that they found an opponent that truly, matched their skills. So I think that's a very fun concept. You can definitely think of dragons as these entities that look to, they live for the fight. Yeah, I think that's fun. Then we have dragons as a mating display, hoarding treasure as a mating display. Now, this theory and one of the other theories that we have further on relates a lot to birds, or I guess like a bird-like behavior. Because you can kind of, I know dragons are more often associated with reptiles, but you can kind of associate them with birds as well. Maybe especially even the cockatrice, right? Cockatrice are very related to birds. So in a lot of practices, birds have specific behaviors that they do to try and attract mates. One of those behaviors, for example, tends to be their nests. They try to build like very fancy nests, very cozy areas. Sometimes that attracts mates or potential mates. Or you have, more classic situations like the peacocks, which is the example I mentioned here. You know how peacocks have like these very colorful, very large feathers, tails, that kind of like spread them out to, catch the attention of potential mates. Well, in the case of dragons, I think you could kind of work around with it where they hoard these treasures, and maybe the more treasure they have or the shinier the treasure that they have, they can potentially attract more mates. I think it's an interesting concept to play around. Kind of simple as well, but you could go very deep into how this like a courtship ritual blends into the environment, blends into the biology of the dragon. Um, it I guess it envisions the dragons more like animals, which is it's interesting. Here's the other theory associated with birds. You know how certain birds like magpies or maybe even like ravens and crows, they tend to be very attracted to shiny things. Like they collect shiny things, they bring them back to the nest. It could be for different reasons, just because they like the shine of it, or they think it makes good material for the nest. Again, if you're going to be associating dragons with birds, which could be a fun association, you can go down this route too. It grasps more towards the dragon's, animal behavior, more towards like their instincts. Um, and then just having them grab these shiny things to build their nests because they like the shiny things, comparing them to magpies or other birds, it could be another fun reason, another good reason. Then we have this one. Feeding off the magic or feeding off the mana from the different, treasures that they hoard. I think this one's an interesting one, because it means dragons are closely associated with magical energy, which is a fun concept. Now, for this one, it may be a bit more specific because it wouldn't necessarily have to be just generic treasure. It would be more like a magic treasure, right? Like magic items. So I feel like this could work fairly well in a campaign setting where if the group goes to a dragon's den, they're sure to find magic items because the dragons, they hoard these items to absorb their mana. You can even go around this as well, or play around with it and say the dragons often eat the magic items. So just eating the magic item itself is like a form of nutrition for them. It kind of fuels their mana. You could go around this. Um, if you don't want to make it only magic items and just more treasure in general, you can say that dragons have the potential of absorbing energy from gold or from other precious materials. You can get very creative with this. So essentially, the more treasure a dragon hoards, the more powerful they are because they have more sources to drain this magic or this mana from. Basically, they serve as a type of battery for them, or a fuel. You could treat it as a fuel as well. This other theory, golden dragons and glowing lairs. This is a very fun theory because I feel it's kind of different from everything, from all the theories we're going to see and from all the theories that we've seen so far. It's more of what if humans mistake the fact that dragons have treasure? Maybe dragons are very shiny, very golden in nature. Their scales maybe shimmer. Maybe their eggs emanate this like glow. Maybe even their droppings, as I mentioned here. Maybe like the feces sparkles, or maybe even they defecate gold. Who knows? You can get creative with it. They do all that, so the humans, the times that they've seen dragons, they've only seen this golden glow. And for humans, seeing golden glow, they automatically associate it with treasure, with riches. So now humans are stuck with the idea that, okay, if we go to a dragon's lair, we'll see the glow, and obviously, because it's glowing gold, we'll find treasure. That's just how it works. Maybe no human has successfully lived the venture of going to a dragon's den, so there are no contradictions to this theory. Maybe it's just been passed on through generations and it's become like common knowledge for the people. Maybe people just don't dare to go to dragons den, right? So this one is a bit different because it would mean that dragons don't actually have treasure with them. It's just a malinterpretation from the perspective of humans or other races. And then we come to the last one, which this one here is my personal theory. This is the theory that I had worked with for the initial case that I mentioned a couple of years ago, which is dragons as guardians of greed. And I feel this one fits very nicely if you lean into the more like wise, maybe oriental dragons. And the theory basically went, dragons have outlived humans for a very long time. And they lived during a period of time where, humanity was consumed by greed. So a lot of wars were fought, a lot of people died, there was a lot of issues, all of this fueled by greed. And it caused the collapse of humanity. It caused humanity's downfall, basically. But the dragons, they still lived. They were still very much, kicking. And when they started to see that the humans, were able to rise again, that humanity started to rebuild itself after all these catastrophes, they brought it upon themselves to kind of aid the humans, but from the background. So what they did is they started to hoard all these treasures, which they considered these treasures were one of the main catalysts for humans' greed. So their leading theory was, if we hoard these treasures and we don't let humanity get near them, then we can avoid a further extinction for humanity. We can save them from a second downfall if they never get to meet greed. Now, you can play around with this. You can say maybe humanity at some point discovers greed through some other source. You can maybe even say humanity desperately tries to hunt down dragons in an attempt to, get back all these resources, all this gold, and in the process, that attempt of getting back the gold is what, awakens the greed in humanity again. Maybe the dragons realize that greed is just a natural phenomenon that lives alongside humans and they can't really stop it. This is my favorite theory, I guess mainly because I'm the one who thought about it. I think it could be really fun. You could get really deep with the lore on this one if you use it for a campaign. And in fact, if I ever go ahead and DM for a campaign involving dragons as one of the main protagonists, I'll probably go along with this theory. I think it's one of my favorite ones. So, if you guys have any theories that you want to go with, or anything that catches your attention, or I guess any comments in general, make sure to let me know. I'm really open to seeing what other people think about dragons in general, or what other people come up with in regards to dragons and hoarding treasure. If you have recommendations for other niche or other tropes in fantasy that you would want to see explored, you can also let me know about that. I have some ideas, but I would really want to know what other ideas people have. So just leave them out in the comments. I'm open to reading those. And I'll see you for next time. I'll try to explore another one of these topics, or maybe I'll see you next time for a different series. And hope you have a good day. Goodbye.